Hey, welcome back, everyone. On this podcast, I talked to Jim Aken, the author of It's All About the Arrows, Engineering Arrows for Enhanced Hunting Performance. So Jim has a lot of experience hunting dangerous game over in Africa with a crossbow, and that's what we dive into. Some of his hunting experiences, his book, and how he successfully engineered his arrows to be able to harvest dangerous game. I've got a link down below to the book in the description, so if you want to check it out, it really is a great read. It's a lot of good info in here, and Jim is a wealth of knowledge. So enjoy our discussion on his Africa hunts and engineering arrows.
Well, thank you, Jim, for hopping on, and thank you so much too for sending me your book. Um, this is a really cool book. Some really cool experiences that you've had with all the hunting that you've done, especially on the crossbow side of things. I don't think I've seen or talked to anyone that's done all of the dangerous game, African game type of hunting that you've done on the crossbow side of things. So I guess just for my sake, who is Jim Aken, and kind of how'd you get started in hunting, and then how did you go, from wherever it was that you started to the experiences that you had, and ultimately publishing your book. It's All About the Arrows, Engineering for Enhanced Hunting Performance. What's that journey look like?
Oh, well, I got a bow for Christmas when I was 7 or 8 years old. My older brother got one too, and why, I don't know. We didn't ask for it. We weren't into that. We weren't. So I have no earthly idea why my dad got that for us. My dad, by way of Santa Claus, I guess. So anyway, and he didn't. He took us quail hunting occasionally, but basically we were his retrievers. So, anyway, he never hunted big game with us, and he had hunted big game, I think, well, deer, in his younger days. But anyway, we got these bows, so we got out there. Absolutely nobody to teach us how to use them. So we got out there and we were flinging arrows across the backyard. And, we had a good sized yard, which was good, but he got us a couple of bales of hay, 2 or 3 bales of hay, and we were out there trying to hit the bales of hay to start with. And then my brother's bow was a bow dark bow, 45 pounds. And then the big deal then was it was legal to hunt deer with. And I got one, I was just 7 or 8 years old. So I got one that was like 20 pounds, 25, something like that. And anyway, we got out there that summer and threw arrows all over the place, stuck them in the side of the garage, and got where we could hit the bales of hay most of the time. And then we, just played with them and like that. So then I didn't touch a bow for quite a while. When I was in college, I had a summer job in a small town not far from my college, and I took a small trailer house out there close to where my job was and rented a trailer space from this guy. And so I had my little trailer set up under his pecan trees. He had a couple of ponds on his place. He had just bought this place. The ponds were just full of turtles.
Okay.
So I got out there with my 22, shot a bunch of turtles, and then I took my 22 pistol and shot a bunch of turtles. And then I decided to take my bow and out there, and I used my brother's bow dark bow, and I taped the reel to it. I went down and bought a fishing reel and a fishing arrow, which in that day and age was just a solid fiberglass shaft. Arrow was really heavy,
Okay.
and I have no idea how many grains it was, but it was a bunch. And I got out there and shot some turtles with that fishing arrow. And so every day after I'd go out in the evening and shoot turtles, because he told me, if you want to shoot turtles, go out there and shoot them all you can. I'm trying to clean the ponds out. You just bought this place. So then during the day, his kids would go around and take a rake around there and rake the dead turtles up out of the water. And anyway, so I had fun with it that summer. That's all I ever really shot with it. I shot some carp with a fishing arrow and like that, but I never did shoot any animals, and never did really practice enough to get good at any kind of distance with it.
Yeah.
And
where, real quick, Jim, where did you, what state did you grow up and what college did you go to?
Oh, this was in Oklahoma. I went to Oklahoma State University.
Okay.
Where I was going when I did that. So then fast forward 20 or 30 years. And so now about 10 or 15 years, I guess. Anyway, I was working out here in New Mexico and met a couple of guys that were shooting bows. And by then, the compound bows had come in. They were brand new then. So I got outfitted with compound bows so I could go out and just, after work and whatnot with them weekends or whatever. And kind of fell into that, shooting a compound bow with aluminum arrows and screw-in points, which was a big deal. This was in the early 70s. And so I went deer hunting a couple of times with it, but I was never able to really connect because I was out there trying to hunt deer like you do with a rifle in the mountains in southern New Mexico. And so a 60-yard shot was pretty close in that terrain and that environment. So I never did actually get a good shot on a deer or even take a shot on a deer. And then so I got to put that aside as a lost cause for several years. And then what was I doing? I'd taken something to the taxidermist here in town. And it seems like it was a badger that had trapped. And I'd taken him in to get him mounted. And so my taxidermist was telling me about a fellow. He says, the son of a friend of mine has got this place in Africa, and he's dedicated the whole ranch to archery, bow hunting. And he gave me a flyer that they'd printed up there. So I came back and was thinking about it. A friend of mine had, that's what we were doing down there. He had something down there, and he's the one that told me about it, actually. And so I connected with them and checked it out. And so they told me kind of what they had, and I called the guy on the phone and was talking to him. And anyway, I was very surprised that my wife said, "You ought to go do that. You've been wanting to do that forever. You ought to go do that. You keep reading these articles and magazines and stuff." And so, which surprised me. So then I set up a hunt with him, and I set it up around our 35th wedding anniversary, I think it was.
Okay.
And so I was just really surprised about all that, and got that all set, sent him a bunch of money, and, half now kind of deal, So sent my half down payment and bought tickets and stuff like that. So I was going to take my wife. Since it was our anniversary, I was going to take her with me, and I always try to include her. If she wants to go, she's always welcome. I make that very clear. And so she wanted to go with me, and so I arranged that I was going to hunt for 10 days, and then I arranged a tour for her, a lady that the outfitter there knew and recommended. And so she went to a bunch of museums, and they went to the flower and wine country. They got a area there in South Africa over closer to Cape Town that raises flowers and has wine, places that make wine and stuff, kind of like Napa Valley.
Yeah.
Or something
Yep.
like that here. And then I arranged for us to get together. And of course, I'm doing this. I'm talking to people, and they're giving me recommendations. I didn't know anything about what I was doing, but I was just following recommendations. And so I arranged this for us to meet up after my hunt and after her tour. We were going to meet at Sun City, and she happened to mention that that's where Oprah goes. So I thought, okay. I did one thing right. Man, if Oprah goes there, that's the highest recommendation, And so we went there and did a bunch of stuff, took some tours, and did a hot air balloon ride in Pilatusburg Park. And so that kind of thing. And so we had a really good time. And then, I told her, well, I'd like to go back. And she was all for it. I couldn't believe it. But right up, just before we left to go, she said, oh, did you know that Johannesburg is the diamond capital of the world? Oh, no. She was ahead of me the whole time. She just led me down the primrose path there, So,
Yeah.
But as part of her tour, they went to the Diamond District in Johannesburg, and the lady giving the tour didn't really want to go down there. And after we got to talking to her, it's a fairly rough part of town, and like that, and not too nice part of town. So they went to one place and then got out of there. And she said, well, the prices here are just higher than they are in the United States. I said, well, I think De Beers probably knows the price of diamonds everywhere. So you come to find out, she didn't really save any money over there. And she said, plus I like the jewelers here because I can buy something, then, I can go back and trade it in on a bigger piece and trade it in on a bigger piece and like that, and plus I can get insurance on it if I lose the diamond out of it. So I said, we'll just buy them here then. So that's kind of what she started doing there. And so anyway, that was kind of my story. And I started going back every year. And my PH there, the professional hunter that was I guess over here you'd call him your guide, but
Mm-hmm.
he was the one that was with me all the time. And so he said, well, Jimmy, you ought to come back next year. We'll go after something a little bigger, And the first time over there, I got mainly plains game. I think the biggest thing I got was an eland, and they're pretty big. They're not ferocious or anything, but they're plenty big. They're about the size of a rainbow bull. They look a lot like a rainbow bull. If you take their horns off, they look just like a rainbow bull.
Okay.
And so anyway, we just kept getting bigger and bigger stuff. We went and got a Cape Buffalo, and then he proposed a hippo hunt. And he said, we ought to go get a hippo. This was after he saw how my crossbow worked and what it could do.
Yeah.
And everything we shot that air just zinged right through it, We ought to go get a hippo. I said, what the hell do I need a hippo for? "Oh, you got to have a hippo. You got to have a hippo. If you're not in Africa, you got to have a hippo." So I went back and I keep records. I got an Excel spreadsheet. It's got all my hunting arrows and what I hunted with it, and then a little comment section on what it was good at and what it wasn't good at, and all that,
Okay. Yeah.
I went back and looked through my records, and I said, okay, I did real good with the setup, with my off the shelf. The first time I went over there, I wasn't building arrows or anything. I just bought everything off the shelf. That did pretty good, especially on the little stuff. It did excellent on the stuff up to the size of a deer and elk. And but it started. I would have liked a little better performance on the eland. And
Okay.
I thought, okay, if I'm going to go get a Cape Buffalo, I want something more than that. And so I started thinking about that, and I remembered my Newtonian physics from Physics 101 in college, and so I remembered some of it. So I went and dug out my physics book and started looking it up. So I thought, well, I need heavier arrows and then need heavier points. And during this process of looking all this stuff up and searching for it and talking to people about it, I ran across some stuff by Ed Ashby, Dr. Ed Ashby, and the stuff I originally read was some of his reports that are on Alaska Bowhunters website.
Okay.
The grizzly stick people. And
Yep.
So I went and read all that stuff on their website, and that really pointed out the need for front of center loading, FOC.
Yep.
And well, that became one of the main measures that I was keeping track of on these arrows.
And all of these. Oh, sorry. I was just going to make sure. So all of the Africa hunts that you did were with a crossbow, right? Or did you start with a vertical bow at all?
No.
No.
Oh, what happened was, I left that part out. That was the best part. I was going to go over there with my recurve bow, and that's the way I set up the original first time hunt in Africa. Well, and I had all this money, I had half my hunt paid for. I had airline tickets paid for. I had the guide and for my wife and all that paid for. So I'm into this thing, about knee deep, and as far as money goes. And so we had that summer we were buying a house here in Albuquerque. We were moving from El Paso to here to Albuquerque.
Okay.
And so I went out in the garage, and of course everything's empty. You walk into a house, nothing in it. And I told my wife, if there's anything you want to change, do it now. Because this is very odd for people to move into a house that's completely empty, right? Very few people get to do that more than once in their lifetime. And so I said, if anything you want changed, well, we changed a bunch of stuff, and we put in, granite countertops and stuff like that. Well, I went out to the garage, and this had a 2-car garage was the main part. You had a 3rd car bay off to the side, but in the 2-car place, I had one little 60-watt light bulb up there. And I thought, well, this ain't never going to work, because I'm going to want to work in the garage, especially in the wintertime, And so I decided I'd put in some more lighting in the garage. So I was up there on a ladder putting in some big fluorescent lights and doing the, getting the wire to them and all that. So I stepped down off my ladder to pat myself on the back and admire my handiwork there. And I missed the bottom rung on that ladder. I just caught it with the tip of my toe. And when I put weight on it, my tip of my toe flexed and down I went, fell right flat on my back, caught in my head, and tore up my shoulder. So I'm out there rolling around on the floor, and so got up and couldn't pick my arm up. So went to the doctor. They said, well, you got some torn muscles and torn ligaments in your rotator cuff. And so with that, pretty much ended my bow career as far as the regular vertical bow.
Yep.
So I call up my guy in Africa, call him up and whined around about that. Kind of went whine, oh boo, poor me. And so he said, well, why don't you just get a crossbow and come on over? And I said, can you do that? Is that legal? Because at that time in New Mexico, crossbows weren't legal.
Yeah.
So, for anybody, So anyway, he said, yeah. He said, you'd be hunting on my ranch, and I can do whatever I want to on my ranch. So I went around all over town looking for crossbow stuff. And everywhere I went to every store in town. I'm talking about, I got up early in the morning and started out, and it was dark when I got home. I went to every store in Albuquerque that had anything related to archery or bows or anything.
Yep.
And everywhere I went, they said, oh, no, we don't have any crossbow stuff. That's illegal here, So I said, well, I'm not going to be using it here, but okay. So I went back home after the end of a very frustrating day. And so I called my guide in Africa there. And again, it's whine, poor me. So he said, well, I'm not sure what you have there locally, but he said, I had a guy over here, a month or so ago, and he was shooting an Excalibur. So why don't you try looking them up and seeing if you can find them? So I said, okay. So I jumped on the internet and looked up Excalibur bows, and they were in Canada. And so I called the guy in Canada, called the Excalibur place in Canada and talked to the guy there. And he said, well, I told him I want to buy a bow, and I can't find one anywhere. Told him where it was at and everything. He said, well, are you anywhere close to, I think it was Ohio or somewhere? And I said, well, I'm as close as UPS, And so he said, well, I just got off the phone. He said, I just literally just hung up the phone. From talking to the guy, we sent him 5 of them. He'd ordered them from his place there. And he had called me and told me how impressed they were with them. And he said, I talked to him a while, and he said, they've got a store there, an archery store. And he said, everybody, when they got those, they took one out and put it together and started shooting it. And so all the salespeople shot it. And he said, even the girls in the office up there came down and shot it. And so everybody was really impressed with it. And he gave me the guy's name. So I said, okay. So I called him. And he got on the phone, and I told him I was looking for a bow and that I'd talked to his son. He said, I just got off the phone with him. And I said, yeah, that's what he told me. He told me I should call you, tell you my situation, and see if you had one. He said, we sure do. Man, we love them. We've been shooting it out in the warehouse, in the back there. And he said, we've been shooting that thing, and everybody in the store shot it. And he said, we love it. I said, okay. And he also told me you'd give me 50% off. He said, no, he might have overstepped his bounds on that part of it. I said, no, I had you going there so good, I just couldn't resist,
And what,
said, no.
what year was this, Jim?
This was let's see, 2000, 2005
Okay.
or 6, somewhere in there. Yeah, 2005 or 6, somewhere in there.
Okay.
And let's see, 1971 plus 35. What's that?
Yeah.
2001, 2006. Yeah.
Yep.
About 2006. It was my 35th wedding anniversary. So anyway, so I said, can you sell that to me and ship it to me? He said, you betcha. I said, can you take a credit card over the phone? He said, you betcha. So
Perfect.
I gave him my credit card number. I'm not kidding you, Matt. 3 days after I talked to him on the phone, all of that stuff was sitting on my front porch. And
It's like Amazon Prime.
Yes. And so, all it took was the internet and the credit card, and boom, it was here. And I spent 14, 16 hours out driving all over town and didn't get any of it. So I told him on the phone, I said, now, I want everything I need to shoot this thing. I want to be able to take it out of the box, put it together, whatever assembly is required, and take it out and shoot it in my backyard. Can you do that? He said, you betcha. I said, arrows, everything. And then I want to take it to Africa and shoot it. And he said, you betcha. And so I bought everything I needed. I said, I don't want this to be like the kid that gets something at Christmas time and it needs AAA batteries, and there's no AAA batteries in town, right?
Yep.
And he said, yeah. So anyway, I got that thing, took it out and shot it. I was duly impressed. And then the next year, my outfitter is from Texas, actually. And but his dad had lived here in Albuquerque for quite a number of years. They had a couple of businesses here in Albuquerque. And so he was here in Albuquerque, visited his dad at Christmas time. And so they came over, to visit and get acquainted. And that was the first time I met my PH there. So they came in and we went out into my backyard and let them shoot that thing. And I said, man, this will do it, So then I went that first year. I just went with off-the-shelf arrows and everything like that. And I got, I think, 10 or 11 animals.
Okay.
I got a zebra and I got an eland, which was the biggest. I got a kudu, which is a pretty good sized animal, about the size of an elk. And got a water buck, which is not quite as big, but still a pretty good sized animal. And then all the other stuff was like deer sized stuff and smaller. And so I got everything from, I guess the Impala was probably the smallest thing I got. I got a warthog, which is not all that tall, but they're dense, So anyway,
and I'm looking in your book too, just to I found the zebra and the kudu. And does this sound right here? Is this part of your book was the Excalibur Exomax 225-pound recurve, shooting 20-inch Easton XX75 aluminum arrows, and the good old 100-grain Wasp Hammer SST broadheads, which I think that's a 3-blade. Is that 3-blade?
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And
430 grains total, 19% FOC, flying at 308 feet per second.
Yeah. So that Excalibur wasn't real fast, but the reason that I went with that was because it's a recurve. It doesn't have any wheels or cables and all that stuff, because I knew I was going to be out in the middle of nowhere, and so if something broke, I'd be shut down. And that's aggravating enough when you're right there just on a weekend trip from home. But to be 8,000 miles away. And to spend that much money, because it costs a small fortune just to get over there
Oh yeah.
to where you're going to go. So that's why I went with recurves, Excalibur, and then later I started using the what the heck was it?
Is it Crossbow? Is that what the other crossbow?
Yeah.
Which is one I was wanting to. That was one I was wanting to ask you about, because I feel like I've seen that, but I know nothing about that bow as basically like a quad limb recurve. Where
the quad limb was the one I designed? That was the hippo hunt.
Okay, but, so you had that bow was your design, kind of like a special made bow from them?
Well, I had bought their regular 225-pound bow because about that time Excalibur was, I think the owner was retiring and they'd sold it to somebody else. I was having trouble with it going out of killer, so I went to the Crossbow and used that for several years. Then they came out with the first version was a real big thing. It was real wide.
Okay.
And then they came out with a shorter one, more compact. It was still 225 pounds. And I got one of those. And then every time I'd go over to Africa, I'd come back without my bow because somebody would fall in love with it over there. So the deal, I used it for part of my tip on.
Yeah, that works.
And with my PH, and I told him, I said, now I'm going to leave this with you, and I'm also going to leave you, cash money, because I know you got to pay bills over there just like you got to pay bills here. So anyway, I said, now if I ever get over here and we need it, we lose it in the airlines or we, whatever.
Yeah, it's there. You got a few over there.
And I got one here. And
yeah.
He said, yeah, that's good. That's good. And so he took it, and then pretty soon he sent me a picture of his wife who shot something with it. And then next thing I know, he sent me a picture where his little girl had shot something with it. And well, they were using that and everything. And so then every time I'd go over there, he'd say, we need to move something a little bit bigger, So as it turned out, I've got 3 or 4 Cape Buffalo and hippo, and all the plains game that we could scare up there. And just everything I pointed it at seemed to fall over. So that turned out to be a real good deal. And it was really a culmination of, like I said, facts and things that I'd learned in Physics 101, Newtonian physics in college, and experience, and then the experience of lots of other people, and then putting that together with the people that are making the bows. And then, like I said, several times I went over there and came back without one, so I had to call Crossbow to get another one. So my guy at Crossbow said, what are you doing with all these bows? Are you losing things to the airline or what? And I said, no, I get over there and somebody falls in love with it and loves it more than I do, so I come home without it, So then when we proposed the hippo deal, like I said, I kept records of everything I'd been doing, and the arrows I'd built and whatnot, how I built them and everything. And So I'd look at that and say, okay, well, I can go do that, and I can use an arrow about like I used on this or that animal. So the Cape Buffalo, I looked at them and said, well, if I used the arrow that I used on that on my eland and just make it a little bit heavier and, like that, I think I can do it. Well, I got up to the hippo and I said, I could probably do that with what I've got, but I'm not real comfortable with that. And basically my schedule was I'd go over there in our summertime and their wintertime. So I'd go over there in May or June and do my hunts, and then come back and we'd start planning for the next year.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't sit around and wait until 2 weeks before I was going to leave before I started working on my arrows. I started working on stuff right then. By the time the next year comes around, I'd shot several hundred arrows of different types and weights and all that, sorted out what worked and what didn't. And so every year I'd go over there with arrows that I was very comfortable with and had a lot of confidence with.
Yep.
And because the last thing you want to do is spend that much money and get that far away from home and have something that's kind of iffy, that you're not really confident in.
I think it's cool too reading. I don't know if I'm jumping ahead or if you're getting to it, but just kind of the progression of, you started with everything from, the individual, you bought the Excalibur from the Easton shafts, the 100 grain Wasp, 430 grains total, fast forwarding to your Hippo setup, which was that the Coda Bow 310 pound draw, a 1,250 grain arrow that had a 591 grain custom brass insert in a 315 grain forged stainless steel, like a basically Ashby 3-to-1 style single bevel, basically 35% FOC. I mean, that's an absolute monster. Your insert is more than, myself or 99% of crossbow hunters hunt with. It's awesome.
Well,
I suppose on a Hippo, you've got to have a setup like that.
It's all about the momentum on that. In its original configuration, when Newton came up with the concept of momentum, he used a small p in the formula and the reason he used the lowercase p was for persistence. And he wanted the motion to persist, right? Or was a measure of how much the motion persisted. Well, when I was designing the arrows for the Hippo, my main thing was I wanted that arrow to persist all the way through the animal. And you're talking about an animal that's like, 3 or 4 foot wide and 3 or 4 foot thick. And then if you put some angle on that, if you look at the picture on the front of that book,
and
you see me standing out there in the water with the Hippo,
well,
where I'm standing back there is about where one of those arrows went in. It would be just about where my knees would be out there. And it came out just up on his shoulder.
Wow.
And, so it went through like 5 or 6 foot of Hippo, and whatever was in there. And that's the one that did him in. And it, same with those buffalo. I had pass-throughs on buffalo pretty regularly. But when I designed that arrow, that bow that had 2 limbs on each side there.
Yep.
What I did was I called Chuck at Coda Bow and said, asked him, I said, when you were designing this, going through your initial ramping up to production stage, I said, did you try out different limbs on these things? He said, oh, yeah. And I said, did you ever try, what was the heaviest limbs you ever tried? Did you ever try any that were like 300-pound limbs? Because the ones they went into production with were 225 pounds. So I assumed that they probably, and they've got models that you can buy that are like 150 pounds. I think they go all the way down to 100 pounds. But I was interested in the other end, the top end of the scale there. And he said, no, he said 225 pounds. When we got to that, that's about all most people could handle. And
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
because my idea was, I was hoping that he had a set of limbs that were like 300, 325, something like that. And this is kind of by guess and by golly, because, like I said, I was going through my records, and I was just uncomfortable with a 225. And I thought, man, if I could get something like 275, 300, 325, somewhere in there, I'd be a lot more comfortable with that. But he said, no, he didn't have any. They never got that heavy, because by the time they got to 225, there was lots and lots of people that couldn't manage it.
Mm-hmm.
So I told him I was, going to go shoot a hippo. It was funny because he said exactly word for word what I had said to my PH over that. What the hell do you want to shoot a hippo for? And I said, I don't know. My PH says we got to go do this. So, I had an older brother, so I was always the little brother that just followed him around. Yeah. Everything he said, I wanted to be in on. So, but he said, "Gotta go get a hippo." I said, "Okay, yeah, okay." Then I thought, wait a minute, what the hell do I want a hippo for? Well, come to find out, hippos are very good to eat.
Okay.
And I mean, the meat is excellent, and there's a lot of it.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine.
So that was one thing, but of course I don't get to benefit from any of the meat because it's too damn expensive to bring it home. So it costs.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I don't know. It's very expensive to ship stuff.
Yeah.
So I think the 1 cubic foot box that doesn't weigh more than 25 pounds or something was like several $100 to ship it. And so to ship 6,000 pounds of meat back will cost prohibitive.
Yeah, that just goes basically to the community around the area of wherever the animals harvested over there in Africa.
Right.
Yeah.
The deal they got with the different tribes in Africa are, you go hunt on their township, which is like an Indian reservation is here in the United States.
Okay.
So you go hunt on their area there, and you got the government says you got to do some stuff. And then you make a private treaty with the local village or the local chieftain or whatever. And so normally part of the deal is that you give them some meat. And it is amazing to me. I still can't explain it to you. It's to my satisfaction, anyway, about why anybody would be protein deprived in Africa. This animal never worked. The problem is they don't have anything to kill them with. The big animals like the hippos and stuff. So they can't have guns for whatever reason. And so one of the big big deal is you share the meat with them. And so half the meat went to the local tribe, and we were hunting on their on their reservation, so to speak. And then we employed people from that local village there, so they had guys there that were working on roads, and of course my hunting party was guides, trackers, and stuff. And we employed them from the local area. So,
Okay.
and then, so anyway, I got, I think, a couple of meals out of it, and then half the meat went to the local tribe, and then half the meat went to the outfitter who's got to feed his people that work for him. So,
Yep.
So all of the meat went to feed somebody.
That's
Any of it was wasted. None of it.
And that's fantastic, and that's I think what when people see or hear about the African related stuff, I think that often gets missed, or people don't realize just how valuable hunting is over there, and how it like what you're saying, how much meat you can provide for some of those villages. I really wanted I kind of got into like a similar, I don't know if you want to call it like wormhole, if you will, but different game species, obviously. I'm in Michigan. I'm through and through deer hunter. And similar to, I think, a lot of people, or a lot of like the people that gravitate towards Troy Fowler, the ranch fairy, who I think know of,
Yeah.
or have chatted with him, right? And he was kind of the very modern gateway into a lot of the Ashby stuff. I started doing that after struggling with my compound bow, and then at the a couple years ago, or I mean, it's been a little while now, but similar to what you were experiencing in New Mexico, Michigan was you couldn't hunt with a crossbow unless you had basically a doctor's permit due to some injury, disability, or whatnot. And then they passed it, now probably 8-10 years ago. So I started using that a lot, especially in the wintertime. And after doing some stuff a few years ago on the Troy side of things, of tuning arrows, bear shaft tuning, trying to get as much FOC as possible, and having great success with that, I was kind of like, well, there's absolutely no reason you can't translate this to a crossbow. I mean, you remove almost all the human element out of everything Troy's talking about, all the principles Dr. Ed Ashby's talking about, and it was, I mean, basically it was a lot of, had I read your book before all of that, it probably would have even fast-tracked me further, because it's a lot of the same stuff that you were doing. And what I kind of want to go through a lot of like your, you did a really good job with how you articulated, resistance of penetration, kinetic energy, momentum, your penetration coefficient, those type of things. So I want to kind of talk through some of those, but also, I don't know if it's like playing devil's advocate, but I feel like a lot of the pushback, and more so on Troy and Dr. Ed being far more established and knowledgeable in this area than myself, but I often too get that, is when, and people may comment on it, which is why I kind of want to go down this road of the comment of like, I totally understand why you would want to go through this process and maximize momentum, maximize FOC, all of that stuff to shoot a hippo or to shoot a zebra or to shoot these extremely large African game. A lot of people, though, are like, why do I need to do that on a whitetail, on a mule deer, on a feral hog, common animals, North American sized animals? What would you say, I guess, just a kind of at first glance of people that are like, why wouldn't I just shoot fast, shoot big mechanical type of broadhead, big cutting diameter type of stuff, and not necessarily worry about FOC and momentum and resistance of penetration or drag, things like that, when all I'm trying to do is shoot whitetails?
Well, first of all, whitetails can be a challenging target, but the main thing about maximizing your FOC and all that is to maximize your efficiency and your kill rate, I guess. Not sure you want to use that term, but you don't want to shoot something and have it run off and then die of infection or something several days later or whatever. And that's the worst thing that could happen, is if you shoot them and it takes them several days to die. Now, in Africa, when I got over there and was showing the guys there my bow and everything, they were not impressed with that crossbow at all. And one of the guys looked at my arrows and he said, "Where's the groove at?" And I didn't know what he was talking about. Turned to my PH there and I said, "Well, what's he talking about?" And he said, he says, on their arrows, they put a groove down the side of the arrow, and then they put I'm not sure what they call it, but it's a poison. And they render it they boil down some tree sap and some other stuff and make a poison out of it. It's kind of like curare or something like that. And but they make it into almost a tar type substance. And their goal is not to get through the heart and lungs or any other vital organs or cut any vital arteries. Their goal is to just get that curare under the skin, or the poison under the skin, and let the animal die from the poison. So if they shoot a hippo, or if they shoot a elephant, was the big one there, all they want to do is get through the skin and get that poison under the skin. And I understand if you're hunting at a subsistence level and you can't use guns, and they do use guns, but it's kind of hush hush. And I never could get straight answers about why they couldn't, but I suspect that they don't let the natives there have guns. And so exactly why, I don't know, and it's probably different in every different country. But I couldn't ever get anybody to really get into that and talk about it. So when I asked that question, I pretty much hit a brick wall. You knew that they were kind of holding back. They didn't want to talk about that.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure that in my own mind, when I started filling in the blanks in my own mind, I probably put a spin on that that's may or may not be right. You know how it is when you start, filling in the blanks, and you start. Every man runs into this with his wife every once in a while. So he fills in the blanks and comes up sorely misguided. But anyway, but I do know what those guys told me in Zambia there when we were doing the hippo hunt, was that they use poison to do what we try to do with sharp broadheads and front and center loading and all that stuff. We're trying to get in there and cut as many blood vessels as possible. They're just trying to get that poison under the skin, and they just stand back and wait on it to die, and they track it or whatever. And so they don't have the same ethical perspective or moral perspective that we do about killing, about having animals suffering and all that stuff. They're not worried about that. They're worried about eating, right? And I personally wouldn't want to eat an animal that had died from poison, whether or not there's enough poison there to bother me or not. I don't know, but I wouldn't want to try it. But that's the way they were. They're not worried about an ethical heart, lung shot or cutting enough major blood vessels or whatever. But their way seems to be a lot more painful for the animal. I've shot several animals that the arrow went all the way through, and the animal jumped when the arrow hit the dirt on the other side of them. They jumped away from the arrow and actually jumped back toward me. And so, to me, that shows me that the arrow didn't hurt them, but when it hit the rocks out there, they were scared of whatever might be out there, whatever, snake or whatever. And so I've always been pretty comfortable with the results I've got from the arrows, because I've had animals that I shot them and they didn't do anything. They just stood there.
Yep.
Or they walk a few yards and stand there, and then their back end starts wobbling around and they fall over. Or if they do run, they get out there and they run in a big circle and finally pile up in the middle because of loss of blood. They're getting disoriented, they're getting dizzy, and they're not particularly afraid of or hurting from the injury there. And so that's made me very comfortable with shooting him. But I always try for the ethical shots, heart, lungs, major blood vessels. So I try to plan my shots accordingly. And when I was working up on the weight of my arrows, especially for the hippo hunt, I took one arrow, an aluminum arrow, and put a steel rod down the middle of it, and I had to machine the steel rod to fit.
Okay.
And I've got a little lathe that I use for gunsmithing and whatnot. And so I was able to machine that down and got it where I could drop that steel rod down through the middle of it. That arrow weighed up in the 3,000 grain range. Now, boy, when it hit the bag target out there in my backyard, it knocked it flying. So it had plenty of momentum and all that. The problem was that much over about 10 yards, you couldn't loft it over there. And it'd be like trying to play baseball with a bowling ball. So, but if I could have got within 10 yards of the hippo, I sure would have done a number on it. So that was during my, year-long research there, of basically one great big long research project to try to design an arrow that would give me maximum penetration while still having a decent range that I thought I could handle. And my guide had told me, I'd ask him, how far are we going to shoot? What's it going to be like? And he said, well, we set up the hunt for the end of the dry season so that the water level would be down and the hippos would be concentrated in pools on the outside of the curves of the river. So we can walk up on the bank and look down and be within a decent distance of the animals. And so he said, I'm pretty sure I can get you within 40 or 45 yards of a good animal. So all year long, I'm designing my arrows and stuff to be able to shoot 40, 45, 50 yards. But I wasn't designing an arrow to shoot, 100 yards or anything like that.
Yeah.
And
For part 2 of my discussion with Jim, go ahead and click this video link right here.